Hi, it's Julie Shaley here, and this presentation I have for you is about FERPA, what you need to know. What is FERPA? The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or otherwise known as FERPA, was implemented in 1974 and is actually one of the oldest privacy laws that we have in our country. It's a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records maintained by or on behalf of educational agencies or institutions. FERPA applies to all educational agencies and institutions that receive funds under any program administered by the Secretary of Education. So basically, that would be all public elementary and secondary schools and post secondary institutions. The Family Compliance Office of the Department of Education is who oversees FERPA. FERPA was established to give parents certain rights with respect to their children's education records. These rights include the right to inspect and review their records, seek to have their education records amended in case there's a mistake, and also to have some control over the disclosure of their child's personally identifiable information called PII. These rights actually then transfer to the student themselves when he or she reaches the age of 18. These are some examples of PII. I'm not going to read them all. But it is definitely not an extensive or an exhaustive list either. There could be other things that are considered personal identifiable information. FERPA provides the right of parents and adult age students to inspect and receive a copy of their student records. It also provides the right to deny access to others, specifically those outside the school system. There is an exception there, but we'll talk about that pretty soon. It also provides a process to correct errors, like I mentioned before. It also provides the right to opt out of military recruitment and opt out of the disclosure of a student's directory information. Directory information is different from personal identifiable information. Each school determines what their directory information contains, like names, addresses, phone numbers, whatever the school has determined is going to be their directory information. They have to notify families about what can be disclosed and what can't be disclosed. How does FERPA affect a general classroom teacher? Now, this is really where the meat and potatoes for most of us is. First of all, we have to be careful with the technology that we use in our lessons. Don't use anything that's unapproved, where students have to enter their personal information. A second way this affects a general classroom teacher is, and I think we all know this, but it's a good reminder that we need to keep all student data secure. We need to make sure we aren't accidentally disclosing the student information to the wrong people. We need to keep graded material and grade books in safe places, and that includes computer screens when you're not at your computer. It is a good idea to lock that down so nobody else can get into it. And then also we want to make sure that we're not discussing student information with anyone unless they have a legitimate educational goal for that child. A third thing to remember for a general classroom teacher is responding to access requests. You can communicate education record information with the student's parents and legal guardians, but when you are in doubt, check with your administrator. What are some other things that the district can do to assure that we are compliant with FERPA? Number one, choose compliant vendors. These are agreements with third-party vendors that must ensure that the vendor also understands it is their duty to comply with FERPA. We all need to be aware of what is in those contracts and make sure that we are holding those vendors to the contracts, because the bad thing about that is if we aren't paying attention, we can be held liable for the actions of outside vendors. Schools need to know how the vendor gives parent and student access to records and how it prevents unauthorized users from accessing that data. Be wary of free vendors. Oftentimes, they are just out to mine the data that they receive, and they turn around and sell that. A second thing that the district can do is to train all school employees and do that yearly. Employees need to understand the rights that FERPA awards, the requirements of the school, and it's just good to have a little refresher on the forgettable nuances and a reminder that unintentional violations still have consequences. Okay, so unintentional violations like throwing old records in the trash can, denying someone their right to a student's FERPA record, discussing something a staff member read in the student record, and accidentally hitting reply all when emailing information related to a student's FERPA record. A third thing is to implement compliant policies and procedures. These would make it easier for staff to comply. Things like shred old papers, um, implement data destruction best practices that are found in the table in the next slide, develop a response plan for a data breach, and prohibit emailing private data. And here is the table on the next page, which shows different ways to destroy data. A fourth thing that districts can do is to encrypt files and emails. This is just an extra layer of protection for school employees. That extra layer of protection can help out in just in case, like someone accidentally loses their Chromebook or tablet, or in other cases where it might be stolen. So that just extra layer of protection would protect school employees and the school. 5. There are other you can implement other prevention tools, um, things like compliance monitoring mechanisms and case management software. So there are some special things though, like what about FERPA with regards to surveillance cameras at school? So nowadays, lots of schools, in their effort to keep schools safe, have surveillance cameras. How does that play out with FERPA? Cameras can be placed in areas except those where individuals would have a reasonable expectation of privacy, such as restrooms. Hallways and common areas are common. People expect that they're being recorded in those places. When a surveillance recording qualifies as an education record, that is, when it's directly related to a student and is actually maintained by the educational institution, it must be disclosed to the parents of the student for whom it is an education record. However, if those recordings that are created and maintained by a school's law enforcement unit are not education records, therefore not confidential. If, however, those recordings are provided to and then maintained by the school, they then become education records. So it just depends on who is making the recording and who is maintaining it. What about FERPA with regards to school law enforcement units and resource officers and outside law enforcement units? A law enforcement official who is an employee of the district is considered a school official and may disclose education records if they have a legitimate educational interest. If the district has outsourced the function of providing safety and security, these officers, even when they're off duty, may also be considered school officials. They are allowed to disclose PII for the purpose of promoting school safety and the physical safety of students. They may not, though, redisclose to anyone else. So they can't go back to the department and talk about it with other officers, unless it's by subpoena or court order, or it's a health and safety emergency. Law enforcement records are not protected under FERPA. And what about FERPA with regards to immigration and customs enforcement? Under FERPA, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement does not have unfettered access to student information. They can request directory information, but schools are required to give parents a reasonable amount of time to request that the school not disclose that information. Exceptions to this would be if schools were disclosing the information in compliance with a judicial order or subpoena, in connection with a health or safety emergency, or if the student was involved in a violent crime or sex offense. And then I included some scenarios here for if someone in my district was going to do this on their own, they could interact with the scenarios. I'll show you how it works. So What would you do in these purpose scenarios? The directions are read and evaluate the situation. Click on yes or no for each scenario. And I actually got all these scenarios from Rosenberg's The Teacher's Guide to Understanding FERPA. Scenario 1. You leave your classroom for a few minutes during your planning time. Before you left, you were working with personal student information, but you did not lock your computer. While you were gone, an unauthorized person came by your room and retrieved some student information from the computer screen. Under FERPA, is your school responsible? So what I've done here is have them choose yes or no. Okay, so I'm just going to choose wrong first. So I would say no. And if I say no, oops, it's not working. Anyway, it's supposed to, if you're actually choosing, it takes you to, there it is, the wrong answer. So then click on the scenario below to go to the right answer. So if I click on one, it takes me right to the scenario answer. Information on a computer screen should be protected the same way as printed reports. Computer programs with confidential information should be closed when you are not using them. The computer should be locked when you leave the room. Printed materials should be filed on a secure place and not simply left on your desk. The medium that holds the information is not important under FERPA laws. No information should be left accessible or unattended, including computer screens. So then we can click on next scenario, and it takes us to the next one. So those are, I included all four scenarios because I thought they would be good for training. I especially like number 4 because it could be either one of those answers. A parent comes into your room one day after school. Her daughter's birthday is next week, and she would like to have a list of students' names in the class and their addresses to send out invitations to the birthday party. You have known this parent for years and trust her. Can you provide her with the names and addresses of the students in the class? And it doesn't really matter, yes or no. It depends on your school district. If your district, as long as you're as long as the school has given parents and eligible students annual notice that type of directory information could be disclosed, then it's okay to do that. However, if your school has not designated this information as directory information, then you cannot disclose it. And as I said before, those 4 scenarios I think are ones that teachers can relate to. They are scenarios that I have been personally involved in, especially this one. The birthday one happens a lot. So yeah, I think that those scenarios are good starters for the conversation and a good assessment of whether or not people understand fully FERPA and what the expectations are with with making sure that you are compliant.